They call it the farm. A name that sounds peaceful, almost innocent. But behind those gates in rural Louisiana, it's a place where life and death share the same soil. Before we continue, if you want more real stories from inside America's darkest prisons, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let's step inside Angola. At sunrise, a thin fog rolls over 6,000 acres of farmland. You can smell the wet grass and diesel from the tractors. Somewhere in that mist, a siren breaks the silence. Another morning at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States. Most inmates here are serving life. Some waiting for death. Angola sits on what was once a slave plantation. The land still bears its scars, red clay soil, rusted iron gates, and fields that stretch endlessly toward the Mississippi River. In the 1800s, enslaved Africans worked this ground under the whip. Today, prisoners in faded denim pick okra and soybeans under the same sun. Many of them are black. Many are descendants of those who once worked this land as slaves. That's why locals still call it the farm of no return. For those on death row, mornings are different. The sound of chains dragging along concrete echoes through the narrow corridor. This is the death house, a single hallway that leads to the execution chamber. Inside, a man named Joseph Woodridge sits awake long before dawn. He's been here for 19 years. Convicted of a double murder, sentenced to die by lethal injection. But today isn't just another day, it's his last. The air feels heavier. Every movement around him, the shuffle of guards, the clank of metal doors, reminds him that time is running out. He's showered, dressed in clean white clothes, and given one final meal: fried chicken, cornbread, and a slice of pecan pie. Across the hall, the chaplain waits. He's been here for dozens of executions. He knows the routine, the calm before the storm. The silence before the sound of a heart monitor flatlines. At exactly 8 a.m. the warden arrives. His presence shifts the energy instantly. No one speaks unless he does. He reads the official notice signed by the governor, confirming that the execution will proceed at midnight. For Joseph, those words hit harder than any bullet. The legal language is cold, precise, final. He lowers his head and whispers, "Lord, have mercy." In another part of Angola, life goes on as usual. Inmates and the general population march toward the fields. The sound of work songs drifts through the humid air, echoes of the plantation days. Hoe to the row, don't look back. Each man swings his hoe in rhythm, watched closely by guards on horseback with shotguns resting on their saddles. From above, it looks like history repeating itself. Men in lines, bending under the sun, surrounded by barbed wire and gun towers. Angola runs like a small city. It has a church, a radio station, a magazine, even its own rodeo, where inmates ride bulls in front of cheering crowds from outside. But behind that spectacle lies a truth. Angola's economy thrives on inmate labor. Every acre of cotton, every can of prison-made jelly, every piece of furniture, all made by men who earn just a few cents an hour. As the day stretches on, Joseph sits in his cell reading a worn-out Bible. He circled a verse in red ink: "The wages of sin is death." He told the chaplain he's ready, but no one ever truly is. When night falls, the temperature drops. The corridor grows quiet. The guards switch shifts. The execution team arrives, all wearing plain clothes, no name tags. Their faces unreadable. At 11:45 p.m., the chaplain returns. He kneels beside Joseph and asks if he wants to say anything. Joseph's voice trembles. "I just hope my kids forgive me. Tell them I'm sorry." The warden nods. The door opens. 2 guards escort him down the hall, 33 steps to the execution room. Each step echoes against the concrete like a countdown. When they reach the door, Joseph looks through the glass. On the other side, reporters, officials, witnesses. He closes his eyes. The straps tighten. The needle is inserted. The saline starts to flow. The room goes still. Only the steady rhythm of the heart monitor fills the silence. Then a flat line. A soft beep, long and unbroken. Joseph Woodridge, age 52, is pronounced dead. Outside, the fog returns. The same mist that covered the fields at dawn now rises over Point Lookout Cemetery, where Angola buries its unclaimed dead. No tombstones. Just small white crosses with numbers instead of names. Tomorrow the fields will fill again. The tractors will roll. And life at Angola will continue, as if nothing happened. Death row at Angola is unlike anywhere else in America. It's quiet. Too quiet. A silence so deep that even the hum of the fluorescent lights feels loud. Every man here lives inside a cell no larger than a walk-in closet, 6 by 9 feet. Steel bed, thin mattress, metal toilet, and a slot in the door where food trays slide in and out. No windows. No sunlight. Just the endless white walls and the echo of your own breathing. Across this hallway, 70 men wait for execution, each in isolation, each counting time in their own way. Some write letters. Some draw. Some pray. Others just stare at the ceiling for hours, lost in memories of a world that no longer remembers them. Mornings begin the same every day. A bell rings at 5:30 a.m. Guards walk down the row, keys jangling, boots thudding against the floor. Count time, one shouts, and every inmate stands at the front of their cell. The metal doors vibrate when the guards tap them with their batons, making sure everyone's alive. After count, breakfast arrives. Usually a scoop of grits, a biscuit, and a hard-boiled egg. No talking. Just the scrape of plastic spoons on trays. Some inmates trade their food through the door slot, a piece of bread for an extra sugar packet. Tiny deals in a world where everything else is gone. One inmate, Earl Red Jefferson, has been here since 1998. He killed a man during a botched robbery when he was 21. Now he's 50, his beard gray, his voice soft and calm like a preacher's. "I've spent more time in this cell than I ever did free," he once said to a reporter. "They say we waiting for death. But truth is, death waiting for us." He spends his mornings reading the Bible, sometimes out loud. His voice drifts down the row, giving rhythm to the silence. Other inmates listen, even the ones who claim not to believe. By 9 a.m., the air in the row grows thick with humidity. There's no air conditioning, just the steady whine of an old fan at the end of the hall. Sweat drips from faces. Some men soak towels in cold water and wrap them around their necks. The heat doesn't just wear down the body, it grinds the spirit. At mid-morning, a few inmates are escorted out for their 1 hour of outdoor time. Hands cuffed behind their backs, chains clinking around their ankles, they shuffle toward the small recreation yard, a cage within a cage. The sky looks blinding after hours of concrete walls. Some pace in circles. Others lift their heads just to feel sunlight on their face. A guard once said, "You can tell who's been here longest. They look at the sky like it's a stranger." By noon, lunch arrives, beans, cornbread, and rice. It's served on trays stamped property of the state of Louisiana. Most eat quickly, then slide the tray back out through the slot. Afterward comes the hardest part of the day, the long stretch between meals when time feels frozen. Some inmates try to mark the hours. They count footsteps in the hallway. They listen for distant sounds, a door closing, a bird outside, thunder far away. Tiny reminders that the world still exists. Then there's the chapel program. Every Wednesday, the prison chaplain walks down the row with his Bible tucked under one arm. He speaks to each man through the metal door. "Any prayer requests this week?" he asks. Sometimes they talk about faith. Other times, football. Sometimes they just talk to remember what it feels like to be human. He keeps a notebook, names, notes, birthdays. When an execution date comes up, he's the one who visits the inmate every day leading up to it. That's called Death Watch. For 3 days, the condemned is moved to a special cell just steps away from the execution chamber. He can receive visits from family, clergy, and lawyers. Every moment is watched, logged, and recorded. It's a process that's meant to be humane, but it feels like slow-motion dying. Outside the death row unit, Angola keeps running like a machine. Inmates working the fields. Guards patrolling the fences. Church services. Rodeo events. Even a prison radio station called KLSP, the inmate voice of freedom. You can hear gospel music echoing faintly even from death row. It's surreal, the sound of praise floating over a place built for punishment. At night, the row dims again. Lights flicker off one by one. A single bulb stays on outside each cell, never fully dark, never fully light. Men lie awake, staring at cracks in the ceiling. Some whisper prayers. Others replay their crimes in their minds, wondering how one moment led them here. Earl Jefferson once told a journalist, "The worst part ain't dying. It's knowing the world forgot you long before you die." And in a sense, he's right. Angola's death row sits far from any major city. Few visitors come this deep into the prison grounds. No TV crews. No crowds. Just the endless hum of lights and the quiet waiting of men counting down years, months, days. They call it the farm. But it isn't the kind that feeds families. It's the kind that feeds a system. Every morning at Angola, before the sun burns through the fog, hundreds of men line up outside their dorms. Denim uniforms faded to pale blue, boots caked with dried mud, faces hollow from heat and time. They stand shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the count to clear, waiting for the day's orders. Then comes the shout. Let's move. Chains clink. Boots stomp. And another day begins. The men march in long lines toward the open fields, rows of cotton, soybeans, and corn stretching across 6,000 acres of land. In the distance, guard towers rise like thin crosses against the morning sky. Each tower manned by an officer armed with a rifle. If a man runs, he won't make it far. The next town is 20 miles away, surrounded by swamps, gators, and the slow bend of the Mississippi River. The work is called field line. It's Angola's oldest tradition, dating back to when this same soil was worked by enslaved Africans in the 1800s. After the Civil War, when slavery was outlawed, Louisiana replaced it with something new: convict leasing. The state began renting prisoners to private plantations, railroads, and mines, a system so brutal that historians call it slavery by another name. When the state eventually took over Angola Plantation in 1901, little changed. The same overseer houses, the same tools, even the same songs carried through the air. Only the uniforms were different. Today the fields still operate the same way, only now it's called prison industry. Every crop planted, every piece of equipment repaired, every bucket of produce sold, it all brings money back to the state. For the inmates, the pay ranges from 2 cents to 20 cents an hour. That's if they're lucky. An inmate named Marcus Lee, serving life for armed robbery, once said, "We work like slaves, man. You can pass out in that field and the guard just says, 'Get up.' They say it's for rehabilitation. But it feels like payback." When summer comes, temperatures in Angola can hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The men bend low under the sun, swinging hose through the soil for hours. No shade. No breaks. The guards ride horses, watching silently, their rifles glinting in the light. It's hard labor, the kind that wears down the body and empties the mind. Some call it therapy. Others call it punishment. For the men working these fields, it feels like both. But not everyone here works by force. Some volunteer, because it's the only way to escape the claustrophobia of the cell block. To feel the wind. To smell fresh dirt. To remember, even for a moment, what it means to move freely under the sky. Still, the moral question remains. If a man is sentenced to life or death, should he still be made to work like a field hand? Critics call Angola's system modern-day slavery. Supporters say it gives inmates structure, responsibility, and purpose. But behind both arguments lies one unshakable truth. This land profits from human labor just as it did centuries ago. The rhythm of the fields never changes. When the guards shout, the hose rise and fall in unison, metal striking earth, sweat dripping, voices humming old work songs from generations past. Don't look back, keep that row clean. The sound floats across the wind like a ghost from history. Every man here is reminded of where he stands, not just in space but in time. It's as if the past never left, only changed uniforms. At noon, the men are marched back in lines, escorted by guards on horseback. Some limp. Some cough from heat exhaustion. Others just stare straight ahead, eyes blank from exhaustion. They get 15 minutes to eat, a scoop of rice, beans, or sometimes a peanut butter sandwich. Then it's back to the fields until the sun fades into the trees. When night comes, the sound of the tractors dies away. But the silence that follows feels even heavier, as if the earth itself remembers every footstep, every whip, every cry that's ever echoed through this land. In 2021, a journalist who toured Angola described it as a place where time stands still. She wrote that the smell of sweat and soil in the fields felt hauntingly familiar, like walking through the pages of history itself. For many inmates, working the farm is their only connection to something real. A reminder that even in captivity the human body still moves, still breathes, still fights to exist. But for others it's a living ghost story, a constant reminder that they are trapped in a cycle older than the prison itself. At dawn tomorrow it will start all over again. The same fog. The same count. The same march into the fields. And for those watching from the guard towers, it will look exactly like it did 100 years ago. Because here at Angola, time doesn't heal. It repeats. In a place built for punishment, the last thing you'd expect to find is hope. But somehow, Angola has more churches than some small towns. Inside this maximum security fortress, surrounded by razor wire, guard towers, and death row, stands a white wooden chapel with peeling paint and a rusted cross. They call it the Chapel of Peace. When the doors open on Sunday morning, the sound of gospel music spills down the corridor like sunlight in the dark. Voices rise, deep, broken, powerful, from men who may never walk free again. They sing not because they're saved, but because they still can. Angola's chapel is run by inmates themselves. Over the years, dozens of prisoners have become ordained ministers through a seminary program created by the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. It's one of the few of its kind in the world. They call it prisoners preaching to prisoners. One of them, Pastor Henry Green, was sentenced to life without parole for murder in 1986. He's been behind bars for nearly 4 decades, but today he leads sermons that draw hundreds. He preaches about redemption, forgiveness, and the strange grace that blooms even in places drenched in despair. God didn't set me free from prison, he once said, he set me free inside it. The chapel becomes a refuge, a place where guards and inmates sometimes sit side by side, heads bowed, the same songs trembling from their lips. For a moment, Angola's hierarchy dissolves. The man with the gun and the man in chains share the same silence. It's a powerful sight. Men who once carried anger and violence in their hands now carrying Bibles. They baptize each other in plastic tubs filled with cold water. They hold weddings. They even perform funerals for those who die behind bars. Because inside Angola, death comes often, but dignity must be earned. One of the most remarkable parts of Angola's transformation came not from policy, but from faith. In the 1990s, after years of violence and chaos, the warden at the time, Burl Cain, opened the gates for religion to spread through the prison. He believed faith could reform men where punishment had failed. Within a decade, violence dropped. Inmates began counseling each other, leading Bible studies and mentoring new arrivals. Some called it a miracle. Others called it manipulation. But even the critics admit, something changed. Then there's Angola's hospice program, a place where men die surrounded not by guards, but by fellow inmates. The hospice sits in a quiet wing near the main hospital. Here, prisoners trained as caregivers wash, feed, and comfort dying men, often their own friends or former cellmates. They change bandages, read scripture, and hold hands through the final breaths. The first hospice in a U.S. prison began right here in Angola in 1998. Since then, hundreds of inmates have died in those small rooms, not executed but from age, sickness, and time itself. Many had no family left. So other inmates became their family. Caregiver Robert "Doc" Wallace, serving life for second-degree murder, once said, "When a man's dying, it don't matter what he did. You just see another human being who needs love before he leaves this world." He's bathed over 200 men in their final hours, some whispering apologies, others just staring at the ceiling, tears rolling silently down their faces. The hospice program changed the way Angola looked at death. It replaced fear with compassion, at least for a moment. Even guards who once kept their distance began visiting the unit, talking to dying men they'd supervised for decades. They realized something simple: in the end, everyone bleeds the same. One of the most emotional sights in Angola happens when an inmate dies naturally. After the body is washed and wrapped, the chapel bell tolls once for every year he lived. Then, fellow inmates carry the coffin to Point Lookout Cemetery, a small patch of land surrounded by pine trees, where wooden crosses line the dirt path like soldiers frozen in prayer. Each grave bears a number, not a name. But for a brief moment, that man is remembered. The choir sings softly. The chaplain lowers his head. And the earth, the same soil once soaked in sweat and blood, receives one more. For those still living, the chapel is more than a building. It's oxygen. It's the one place where a man serving life can imagine eternity differently, not as punishment but as peace. When they sing, the walls vibrate with emotion. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. You can hear it echo across the compound, reaching even the death row unit. Some men there close their eyes and hum along through the steel doors. For a few minutes, they are no longer inmates, just voices in the dark, searching for mercy. As night falls, the chapel lights go dim. The cross above the roof glows faintly in the distance. And somewhere deep inside Angola, an old radio plays hymns on KLSP, the inmate-run station. God's grace is greater than our chains. For some, it's just background noise. But for others, it's proof that even here, inside America's harshest prison, something pure can still survive. Before the concrete, before the cells, before the fences that stretch for miles, there was only land. Vast, green, and quiet. But beneath its beauty, Angola's soil was built on blood. The story begins in the early 1800s. This land once belonged to Isaac Franklin, a man whose name rarely appears in history books, yet his shadow lingers over the Mississippi River Valley. Franklin was one of America's largest slave traders. He bought, sold, and transported thousands of enslaved Africans from Virginia to Louisiana. He called his plantation Angola, named after the African nation from which many of his captives were taken. Every field here once rang with the sound of chains, whips, and cries. Men and women worked from sunrise to sunset under brutal overseers. They cut sugarcane, picked cotton, and buried their dead in unmarked graves near the river. By the time Franklin died in 1846, his fortune and his cruelty had become legend. After the Civil War ended slavery, Louisiana found itself facing a new problem. Who would work the fields now? The answer was chilling. The state created a system called convict leasing. Instead of slaves, they used prisoners, mostly black men arrested under new laws designed to keep them in chains. Minor offenses like vagrancy or insulting behavior could lead to years of hard labor. Once convicted, these men were leased to private companies and plantations, including the same lands where their ancestors had once been enslaved. In 1880, Louisiana leased the entire state prison system to two men, Samuel James and James Monroe, who turned Angola Plantation into a working penitentiary. They built wooden barracks, surrounded them with fences, and brought in hundreds of prisoners to plant cotton and sugarcane. The conditions were unspeakable. Beatings, starvation, disease. Some prisoners worked until they collapsed and were buried in the same fields they'd been forced to till. By the 1890s, Louisiana newspapers called Angola the worst prison in America. When the state finally took control of the prison in 1901, little changed. The guards were still brutal. The work, still backbreaking. And the death rate, still rising. Prisoners slept on wooden bunks, shoulder to shoulder, in filthy dorms infested with rats. Medical care was almost non-existent. If a man got sick, he either recovered on his own, or didn't. The strong survived. The weak disappeared quietly. There was no escape. The Mississippi River wrapped around three sides of the prison like a natural moat. Beyond it, swamps, snakes, and endless wilderness. Even if you ran, there was nowhere to go. By the 1920s, Angola had earned another name, the Alcatraz of the South. Not for its walls, but for its hopelessness. In the 1950s and 60s, reporters began to expose the horrors inside. They wrote about guards known as freemen, who carried whips and were allowed to shoot at inmates for refusing to work. They wrote about dungeons, underground cells where men were locked for days without light or food. They wrote about the beatings, the hunger, and the corruption that ran from the fields to the warden's office. One journalist described Angola as a place where the state sends men to disappear. Another called it the closest thing to slavery still operating in America. The outcry grew louder, but change came slowly. Very slowly. Then came 1971, the year of the Angola Rebellion. It started with one man's scream in the Red Hat cell block, a section so cruel that inmates called it Hell's Hallway. The rebellion spread through the dorms. Men armed with shovels, pipes, and desperation rose against the guards. They set fires. They took hostages. By the time it ended, 2 inmates and 1 guard were dead. But Angola would never be the same again. Investigations followed. Lawsuits piled up. The courts forced Louisiana to address the inhumane conditions, but progress was slow and uneven. Even into the 1980s, the abuse continued. Inmates were still working long hours in the fields, still sleeping on concrete, still treated like property. But this time the outside world was watching. In 1995, a new warden, Burl Cain, took over. He brought a new philosophy, one that mixed strict discipline with religion and media openness. He allowed journalists to film documentaries, invited churches to build ministries, and opened the Angola Prison Rodeo to the public. Cain believed that fear kept men violent, but faith could make them peaceful. Under his leadership, Angola transformed from a place of chaos to one of eerie calm. But the past was never far away. The fields still produced crops. The men still marched in lines. And the earth, the same earth that once held slaves and prisoners, still whispered its story. Even today, when the wind blows over the fields, locals say it carries echoes of the past, the sound of old songs, old cries, and the footsteps of those who never left. The ground at Angola doesn't forgive easily. Remembers? And for every man who walks those rows in chains, history walks beside him, unseen but never gone. By the early 2000s, Angola prison had begun to change, at least on the surface. The gunfire, riots, and constant stabbings that once defined it had slowed. The warden's new philosophy was simple: moral rehabilitation. He believed faith, discipline, and hard work could do what decades of punishment could not: transform men from the inside out. The same fields that once broke prisoners now hosted inmate pastors preaching under open skies. The same cell blocks that once echoed with screams now held Bible study circles, literacy classes, and prison-run newspapers. Even the most dangerous inmates were given purpose, as mentors, musicians or caregivers in the hospice program. To outsiders it looked like a miracle. To insiders it felt like survival with new paint. Every year, thousands of visitors arrive for the Angola Prison Rodeo, a spectacle unlike anything else in America. For one weekend, the gates open to the public. Crowds cheer as inmates ride bulls and wild horses, risking broken bones for a taste of freedom, and a few dollars in prize money. They sell handmade crafts, paintings, woodwork, leather belts, even rosaries. Families stroll through the arena eating barbecue and snow cones, as if it were any county fair. But behind the laughter there's a strange unease. The same men entertaining the crowd will return to locked cells that night. Their smiles hide stories of life sentences, broken families and crimes that can't be undone. It's redemption, packaged for an audience. A journalist once described the rodeo as America's most unsettling celebration of punishment and forgiveness. It's both real and surreal, joy and tragedy sharing the same stage. Inside the walls, Angola has built programs that few other prisons can match. There's a fully functioning radio station, museum, barbershop, and print shop. There's even a fire department staffed by inmates who respond to real emergencies across the region. Some prisoners earn college degrees. Others become hospice volunteers, ministers, or teachers. And yet, for most, none of it leads to release. Louisiana has one of the highest life without parole rates in the world. Once you enter Angola, odds are you'll die there. The warden himself once said, "This is a death sentence for most, even if the state never executes them." But for many men change is real. Some who once led gangs now lead prayers. Some who once fought every day now comfort the dying. In their own way, they found peace inside a place built for torment. Earl Red Jefferson, the man from death row who read the Bible aloud, once said in an interview, "Maybe God put me here so I could finally listen. Maybe freedom ain't a place, it's a decision." Still, critics remain. Human rights groups argue that Angola's reforms mask a deeper truth, that forced labor continues, racial inequality persists, and medical neglect still takes lives quietly. They say rehabilitation can't erase the system's foundation in slavery. And they're right about one thing: even in its calmest moments, Angola's past is never silent. The graves at Point Lookout Cemetery continue to grow. Each cross marks another man who lived, worked, and died behind those gates. Some were guilty beyond question. Others maintained innocence until the end. All of them equal now under the same earth. Today, Angola stands as both a contradiction and a mirror. A place where brutality and redemption live side by side. Where men who once destroyed lives now build them again, even if they'll never see the outside world. And where a nation still wrestles with its oldest question: can justice and mercy ever truly share the same ground? As the sun sets over Angola's fields, the land glows gold for a few fleeting minutes. From the watchtower it looks peaceful, like any quiet southern farm. But beneath that calm lies 2 centuries of pain, punishment, and perseverance. This place has seen slaves, convicts, preachers, and killers. It has seen cruelty and kindness, despair and faith, sometimes in the same heartbeat. Every man here is part of that story. Some find redemption. Some never do. But all are reminders of a truth we often forget. Behind every headline, every conviction, every sentence, there's still a human being breathing on the other side of the bars. If this story moved you, share it. Because stories like these keep history from being buried, and voices from being forgotten.